Right, so Tim went on to ask some further questions. He said, we talked about purpose. He thought his purpose in life seems to change a bit over time, so I probed a little, what sort of time scale are you talking on here? Are you talking like day to day kind of purpose, Like today I got to go to work and I got to, earn some money to keep the roof over the family and food on the table, or are we talking a broader purpose? Well, bit of a gap there, but he comes on back and sure. He thinks the longer term purpose. Maybe there's some questions around there. Now, what did he actually say? Let's just have a look at the message. Yeah, to be needed in some sense at one stage, then needed more in other circumstances, said Tim. Yeah, well, interesting thing there. There's this concept, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's an interesting idea. Maslow was some famous psychologist from many years ago. He had this theory. He talked about this hierarchy of needs, and the principle is really that your needs at a higher, sort of philosophical almost kind of level, really only come into their own when the needs at some lower level are met. So you have these sort of physiological needs, like, I need water, I need food, I need sleep, I need a bit of shelter so I don't die, and when these basic needs are met, your next level up from that, what he calls safety. So you're managing to find food and water and stuff, so you're not dying, but there's still some imminent dangers, things that might kill you off if you don't sort of sort them out. So you're looking for safety. Of course, once you're in a reasonably safe environment, the sort of needs that then start to develop, it's funny how at each of these levels the needs higher up in the hierarchy don't really become apparent until you have the needs at the level below, right? Once you've got your safety, then sort of the love and belonging type needs come to the fore. Suddenly it's like, oh my God, yes, the universe is so drab because I have no love. But then, some of that comes along and you're feeling loved and you're feeling like you belong, and that's all well and good. And then, if you manage to maintain that pretty well, then you might move up a level and start dealing with sort of esteem, concerning yourself with building your own ego up some levels on the basis of, I'm loved, I must be pretty good. So, your self-esteem starts to build. And if you've got some reasonable self-esteem, your ego is looking pretty healthy, and you manage to sustain that for a while, you might build up another level, and what was the final one? Self-actualization. So the whole concept of self-actualization really only comes to the fore in the event that all those other needs are met, and you actually have some sizable sense of self-esteem, you're feeling pretty good about yourself. Self-actualization. Getting a bit airy-fairy at that point as to what that might actually mean. It's going to be up to you, really. But if you think about purpose sort of makes sense, and it differs as you sort of move up through these sort of levels. If you're really just having and the majority of the Western world pretty much has their physiological needs met, and they're all pretty much safe. We have police to look after the safety of the world in general, to keep it from being a lawless place We can pretty much all have food on the table. We can, if we're lucky, we can get a bit of love and belonging. And the thing is that as we've skipped from being a religious group, historically, whilst we might have had some call it political leaders, whether they were dictators or whatever they were, we also had sort of spiritual leaders. We had people who, the priests and the whatnot, and they tended to try and guide the spiritual direction of the group. In modern times, we've got a lot more secular. The Western world, on the whole, although there's a bit of religion around, we're still somewhat, we're now somewhat more secular. We've separated the church and the state. The individuals get to decide, how they want to live. And whilst on the one hand, I would personally characterise this as having gotten rid of a great deal of bullshit, that still leaves an odd vacuum, and that vacuum sits there as a gap, because we've got the physiological safety, so physiological needs have been met, safety's largely been met. If you're lucky, you find some love and belonging. But moving up into that self-esteem and self-actualization levels of things, tad tricky. There's no guiding sort of mentor there. There's nobody whose business it is to teach us about these things. Schools certainly don't cover what's necessary there. We're not. When here in Australia we get what do we get? Scripture. Even in the worst case, assuming you manage to rocket into the no scripture version of scripture. Oh damn! I have to say my own kids, or particularly one of them, ran into the no scripture class at school, and comes home one day and asks me, so Dad, the teacher said that we're all going to hell. I said, oh really? Do tell. Who told you this? And it seemed they'd put a severely religious teacher in charge of the no scripture kids. And she told them they're all going to hell. Oh my God. Yes, I was all set to go into school and have words with the headmaster, but somebody beat me to it. She'd already been kicked out of the class. But yeah, it's even worse than that actually. What would be great would be if the no scripture class could be taken up with something practical like ethics. Let's teach them some ethics. Let's teach them some philosophy. Let's teach them to actually think for themselves and consider how to reason with the world. But no, you can't do that, because scripture is treated literally within the schools as being a time when you get to be taught about whatever your religion is. And the kids that fall into the no scripture class, they're not even allowed to potentially gain some academic advantage that they might acquire through having diligently used this free period of time, that while other kids were being indoctrinated into their respective religions, you have to sit quietly and don't do anything academic, don't learn anything, because that would give you some kind of unfair advantage. Never mind. You have to be punished. All good deeds should not go unpunished. So there you are. There we are. So instead of being perhaps taught to think about the existential challenges that you may be confronted with in life, instead you're asked to sit quietly and ignore all that because you're supposed to be heathens, so behave like that, please. And so you come out of school and you have no clue. Um, that's a bit unfortunate. So you've got to start thinking about. You've got to figure out your own way. You're left on your own. It's a bit unfortunate. That's one of the hmm, one of the gaps that exists since we've replaced religious life with secular life. Doesn't mean it doesn't need to be addressed. It does. Just because organised religion, as we saw it, was bullshit, doesn't mean that we shouldn't still deal with those sorts of philosophical existential issues. So what do you do? How should you even think about that? Well, briefly, I suppose, in summary, there's you could look at life like the very postmodernist world, which seems almost it's tempting. It's one of those directions that, like, it seems like any particular choice in life is just about as equally valuable as any other choice in life, and with no sort of great voice from on high saying that this is the way of truth and goodness. You should follow this. It starts to seem like, well, all the other choices are sort of equivalent and equal. Why should we privilege one over another? And if all things are equal, then any decision that I make is pretty much like any other decision I might make. So where'd you go from there? Well, there's maybe some better answers than that. Like, you might actually look at it and go, well, the problem with all those sorts of explanations is the same problem that we actually had with, say, organised religion in the first place, which is that it all pivoted on absolutes. When you consider the notion of an absolute deity, a god, a thing that a being that looks down upon you all and created you perhaps and judges you and all those, I find it's kind of pathetic. It privileges you too much as too human centric to be accepted from me. It says that there's some almighty being that somehow treats the tiny little specks of dust that we are as somehow special. It's a big fucking place. The universe is so fucking huge, and we are such tiny, infinitesimal, insignificant little specks that just frankly has no credence. So where does that leave you? I go, well, there's this thing life. Life's a really peculiar thing. It has its own imperatives. Life is slightly special. And I'm sort of inclined to think that we're somewhere down the path of the development of life. Now, perhaps a little side excursion into the whole concept of life as I see it. You see, I heard a talk from a really great physicist from Harvard a while back, and he talked about life as a side effect of entropy. That was an interesting idea. Life as a side effect of entropy. I mean, who'd have thunk it? How does that make any sense? I should probably sort of blurt in and go, well, what the hell is entropy anyway? See, Entropy is this funny sort of like universal law. It's built into physics. Physicists know all about this stuff, you know. Funny thing goes on. You know how if you break an egg, the egg's not gonna. You never see an egg reassemble itself back in from a broken stuff back into the egg. It doesn't go that way. The whole of the universe at large has a tendency towards disorder. Things break; they don't unbreak. That's sort of entropy at some really basic level. It sort of goes on in the universe in general. It's more sophisticated than just this breaking things level. It's kind of, as a general rule, it's sort of the second law of thermodynamics. It's this concept that everything moves from, let's call it simple structured systems into degraded, broken down, more complex systems. With, I suppose, the really base level explanation though that comes out of it is that you have to look at it in terms of information. Now that possibly means more to me than it does to you. I don't know. I'm a software engineer, and so the idea of information representing a system is pretty natural to me. But from the physics perspective, you can look at the universe and you can say, well, if there's some system and it's in a certain state, how much information would it take to describe it? And this is how you want to think about entropy. I mean, I guess we're going off a bit of a funny tangent here, but we will get back to the whole meaning thing in a moment. Just stick with me here for a moment. The example that this physicist gave, he says, imagine you've got two containers with some liquid in them. One of them's liquid water, and the other one's liquid coffee. And so you've got a container of water and a container of coffee. The information that you need to describe these two systems is relatively simple. One container of water, one container of coffee. Not bad. Now you mix the two together, and of course, given entropy and the way it behaves, it all mixes together, and what you end up with is a container with twice as much, obviously, but coffee water. It's all mixed up and evenly spread throughout it. Entropy given its way, well, everything will dissipate and spread out evenly. That's sort of the way of the universe. But what's really quite interesting about this is that what happened along the way. You see, you went from a system water, coffee, smallest bits of 2 bits of information there. How much of it was there? What sort of thing was it? Times 2. And you ended up with one thing that was coffee water, so one amount of this mixture. And so the system got headed towards slightly lower amounts of information needed to describe it. It degraded. But in the process, what happened in the middle? In the middle, when the coffee water was being poured into the regular water, it would have formed all sorts of swirls and funny shapes. It would have been a right little mess. And the amount of information you'd have needed to describe that would have actually been extraordinarily large. And this, as an example, was where this guy was going, where this physicist was going with this. He was explaining that in the process of getting from one level of entropy to another lower level of, more entropic system, in the process of doing that, it actually had to go through a stage where there was far greater amounts of energy involved, of information involved to describe the system. The system had to become more complex to eventually get to a state where it had a lower energy state entropically. So that's a really, really interesting observation. It tells you something fundamental about the universe. And what he was suggesting there was that this transition is really essential to a thing that goes on in the universe. The most complex things that we see, in fact, life itself, is a side effect of the entropic processes. So it seems like it should be the other way around. It seems like life is a thing that resists the disorder in the world, that brings order out of disorder. But in fact it's not. It's actually, that's a mistake. In fact, life is this process of the universe moving toward greater disorder and going through this more information complex process along the way. We as life consume energy and produce greater disorder in our wake. Every step of the way, every move we make, every step we take, we produce disorder. And that's swirling around us. We consume vegetable matter and meat and energy in a compact form, and we shit and piss and breathe it out into the universe as a more disordered thing than we took in. And along the way, we temporarily get to express this complexity in the universe that is ourselves, that is me speaking to you in a video on YouTube, is the expression of information complexity in the process of entropic decay. It's kind of a wonderful thing to behold, but here we are. And so yeah, there's this thing going on, and I think we want to celebrate this thing that is life, and we want to treat any purpose that we may generate in terms of that, not in terms of some strange absolute, some abstract, oh, the universe, some greater being is somehow, commanding us to do some shit. That's just a pile of bullshit somebody made up. And equally well, trying to compare one thing against another in terms of the greatness of its purpose is just as meaningless when you try to consider it from an absolute perspective. But on the other hand, if you viewed what we are and what we do as an expression of this process of the side effect of entropic decay, which is what we call life, then celebrate life. Celebrate all the amazing things that is life. Go with that, perhaps. Perhaps the bar against which we should consider all progress, all value, all existential purpose should in fact be that. Well, perhaps that's the message for today. Do with it what you will. Enjoy.